Hello, everybody. Today on SailFaster, we have teamed up with Vakaros to dive into the future of race management and performance with a look at one of the most talked about innovations in competitive sailing, Vakaros' RaceSense technology. If you've been on the starting line recently, you've probably either heard about it or indeed raced with it yourself. RaceSense brings precision, automation, and real-time data to what I think we'd all agree is one of the most chaotic parts of any race, the start. It replaces traditional manual pinging with GPS calculated start lines. It gives every boat real-time feedback on their position, and it eliminates line sag entirely. So love it or fear it, it's changing how sailors approach the start. So to walk us through how it works, what it solves, and where it's heading, I'm joined today by Doug Wake, who is the events director of Vakaros and one of the minds behind RaceSense. We'll talk about the tech, the feedback from top sailors, and what it means for the future of fairer, faster, more confident starts. Later on in this episode, we're going to hear from a couple of top pro sailors, Steve Hunt and Morgan Trubovich, on how RaceSense helps them sail faster and in fact win races. Right, Doug, this is all really exciting stuff from Vakaros, but where and how did this all start?
That's a great question, Pete. And, I have to draw the credit back to the two founders of our company, Todd Wilson and Jake Kyleman. They were here way before I started thinking about RaceSense. And really, this all goes back to the 2013 America's Cup, where Liveline, which was developed by Stan Honey, the celebrated navigator and sailor who I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, built out a system initially for broadcast that then stemmed into race management and brought in the first sort of digital race management system in sailing. And at that point, that was super expensive. It was prohibitive in terms of the equipment that needed to be on the boats, and it wasn't something that scaled to the rest of sailing. But I think our founders, as well as quite a few sailors, thought, hey, wouldn't this be cool if this was something that we could scale to the rest of the sport? And Vakaros was founded early on building our Atlas 1 instrument before any of this technology was able to be scaled to J70s and J105s like you're sailing in. But then with our Atlas 2, this instrument is state of the art. It's got dual band GNSS and supports something called differential GNSS as well. And we were able to build technology that is able to be accurate enough and reliable enough to do these race management functions into an instrument that was already going to be on boats on the water. And so in 2022, we started development for RaceSense. In early 2023, we ran our first event in Miami with the M32 catamarans that I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with. And it's really been a wild ride ever since, going from, running a 10-boat fleet and testing at 3 a.m. in the streets of Coconut Grove to, get a new firmware out for tomorrow, to running, world championships every other week. We're a small company. We worked really hard at it. And, from 2023 to now, it's been pretty amazing to see RaceSense grow.
So, Doug, what was the vision behind RaceSense?
That's a really interesting one. I think most of us at Vakaros, if we just look at our own sailing background, are small boat sailors. We're not racing on fancy TP52 programs and, doing all these things that cost $1 bajillion. And so for us, it's important that RaceSense is something that scales to the entirety of the sport. And it really does. It's affordable. It's in a form factor that can be put on all boats. And like I mentioned, we've run racing from Optimus dinghies all the way up to TP52s and truly everything in between, from Thistles, MC Scows, Lightnings, Melgus 15s, these boats that are really in every man's boat. Normal people sail them. It's really important that we can provide for them and scale the solution to help the rest of the sport. Because if we're not creating something that's valuable for all sailors, what's the point? Right? It's so important to us that this trickles down to all levels of the sport, and that those folks who really are the backbone of sailing, right? It's the local fleet racing Flying Scots on a Tuesday night. That is the backbone of sailing. And those folks need to have access to this too. And so we work so hard to keep the complexity and cost at a reasonable level so that these sorts of fleets can use RaceSense. It really is, and I'm not just saying this, it is really important to us that we're able to provide that to the sport.
I'm going to ask you a really pedestrian question, but how does it actually work?
That's a really great question, and it's not pedestrian at all, because the technology to do this, being contained in a small unit that goes on all these boats that can scale from, we've run Opti regattas all the way up to TP52s and boats bigger than that. It's a tricky problem to put everything that you need into these small instruments. And for anybody who's not familiar, The Atlas is just about a little stubbier than, an iPhone 15. The screen is a little bit bigger. It's a little bit wider, but, it's not a large instrument. It's sleek. And so the first thing that it takes to work is building in a bunch of really powerful sensors. So I mentioned earlier, we have a GNSS receiver that's capable of really accurate positioning. And with differential corrections, we can get down now inside of 25 centimeters. We've also got a magnetometer that's super accurate inside. We've got an IMU, and all these sensors work together with motion fusion to actually create a device that knows where it is and where it's pointing really, really accurately. And then comes the network part of everything, right? This isn't just one boat going out and sailing on its own. And the Atlas is a great instrument to go out, even if you're not in a RaceSense event and, ping the start line yourself and go sail around the buoys. It's going to do better than anything else on the market. But for RaceSense, what we have is a small radio in each device. And these radios are not the type of radio that you tune into the traffic reports on when you're driving to work. But they allow us to create a local mesh network of all these devices on the water in any given venue. So one of the cool things that means is that RaceSense is not reliant on cell. It's not reliant on licensing any sort of radio bands like the America's Cup and SailGP systems are. You're able to run RaceSense anywhere in the world where you can get GPS reception. So, in essence, we could go into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and run races using RaceSense. So the devices are all communicating with each other and then with what we call a coordinator device on the race committee boat that then interfaces by Bluetooth with a tablet, where we're able to input commands and then see the information coming from the boats as well. Their positions, their headings, their OCS status, all that sort of stuff. So really, if you think about it, it's a bunch of devices on the water talking to each other, passing information around in a very reliable game of telephone.
For me, that elimination of pinging is two advantages. One, you don't have to join that line and try and ping, and the time that costs and the stress that it costs, with a few minutes from the start time. And then also that thing in the back of your head that did we actually get that ping right? So when I'm looking at these numbers, am I really a boat length or a meter from the line? So eliminating those distractions are, I think, just such massive advantages. And then not having line sag is really interesting because some people take advantage of the fact there'll be line sag. So there's a lot of sort of democratization of starting in some ways.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. And I think when I talked about how it works, maybe I was a little bit too technical. I think, it's worth visiting what RaceSense actually does for you on the water. And like you mentioned, eliminating the need to ping is really important. There are devices much like the ones on the boats that go on each end of the start line that are in real time, multiple times per second, sending their location to the entire fleet. So as the pin and the boat move and the anchor line stretches, boats are able to receive these live updated positions, which is super cool in its own right. A couple other interesting aspects are that the boats are also getting automated timers. I know you do a lot of J105 sailing, but anybody who's doing any sort of sailing, it is so nice in between races to know when the next race is going to start. And we built RaceSense to solve this starting issue. We're still working towards that goal. We did not realize that sailors' most important thing and what they would enjoy the most out of RaceSense is actually just getting their start timer automatically 15 or 20 minutes from the next start.
Yeah.
It's amazing the difference that it makes. Do I have time to adjust the rig? Do I have time to eat a sandwich? And that instantly all of a sudden. So you have all that. And then, like you mentioned at the start, was my ping good? Was my ping bad? You also then get the immediate notification of whether you're OCS or not. So that pops up on your device immediately after the start. And if you're good, exhale. You can sail upwind, keep going and racing. If you're over, it gives you the opportunity to come back and restart. It's not like we're, using U flags and black flags, where, at least in my opinion in sailing, if I'm paying to go to a regatta, I want to sail all the races. I don't want to get kicked out because I started a meter early in one race and didn't get a chance to restart. So I think, and we see this especially in bigger events, being able to go out there and sail under the P flag and sail all the races efficiently with no general recalls, it's really, really cool.
And it's literally a green light and red light, as I understand it.
It's literally a green light. If you're clear, you get a green light and it goes to your normal upwind sailing instrument display. And if it's a red light, it says OCS, you can't possibly miss it. It's flashing at you. You go back. And once you've cleared the line, it says clear, gives you a green light, turn back up and continue racing.
When you're over the line early, you come back and you dip the line. Looking at the committee boat, and sometimes they're not very clear. So clarifying that is huge in terms of stress savings and time savings.
it's amazing to go to these huge events. And one of the classes we work a lot with is the Melgus 15, arguably the fastest growing one design class in the world right now. We're getting 80 to 100 boats at pretty much every Winter Series event. And people are only sailing for 2 days. They're coming down to Florida and they want to get their races in. And in 2 days, we will not have a general recall with 100 boats on the line. We will go and we will start every race on time. And it's a pretty incredible experience for folks who are coming down to go sailing. Who wants to sit through 4 restarts just to get to a black flag? There's no one in sailing that I can think of that wants that. And so, just being able to know that when you're going to go sailing, you're not going to lose races to general recalls, it's a huge deal.
And the system gives you, obviously, time to line and distance to line. Does it give you burn time as well?
Yeah. So with your Atlas, and this is the case even if you're not using RaceSense, you can configure the device to have burn time or time to line displayed. You can do that either as a number or you can have it visually on the LED bar at the top of the device if that's what you prefer. I know for a lot of the SailGP and America's Cup teams, they actually use a visual representation for burn time as well. So yeah, you can do all that sort of stuff. If you think about a lot of the instrumentation and the metrics that you can get on, even up to like a TP52, you can do a huge portion of that in this really small form factor. And, for some classes that isn't right. We run a lot of racing for classes that don't allow distance to line, like, the Lightning or the Opti or the Laser, whatever it may be. And they just have timer and compass. They can't see anything else. And then they get OCS red or green. And that's, really important that we can support racing like that wants to just do that, but still can benefit from the OCS detection. But then, as you go up into the J70, the Melgus 24, and, all sorts of, different boats, the J105, you can add things like burn time and really up your game on the starting line.
So you can adapt it for those classes where, perhaps a compass and a timer is all that's allowed. You were talking about Lightnings the other day as being that class.
Yeah, exactly. There are tons of classes that we've worked with where we have basically locked down to what we call class compliant functionality. I'm looking at my schedule coming up. One of the big events that we're running is the Thistle National Championship. Talk about a traditional class, but one that's now sort of taking a jump towards the future. But for the Thistle, the only metrics that are allowed are magnetic heading, timer, and heel angle. That's all that you can have. So when we go into that event, all the devices are locked down. So that's all that you can see. Now you could take that same device and sail a J70 event the next weekend, and then you'll have all your functionality back, right? But if you're operating in these classes that may not allow full functionality, you can go in and lock things down. And we've done that all the way up to, Olympic classes. We ran the 49er FX and NACRA 17 Junior Worlds last summer. Again, just compass and timer. With the Olympic classes, they're super strict on that sort of stuff, and it's easy. We lock it down, we go sailing, and the sailors get the data that they're used to with the benefit of the race management aspect.
What's coming next for RaceSense and Vakaros?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the important points about RaceSense that I think that people miss is that it is a technology that's constantly evolving. One of the great parts about having the Atlas be the platform for this is that we can always release a firmware update and we can add something new. So recently we've released live tracking, which is pretty cool. So now every RaceSense event at no charge can also broadcast live tracking out to the internet, which is pretty cool. And then also within the last week, we have come out with 3 boat length circle detection and lights.
Are you able to now visualize where the 3 boat circle starts?
Yeah, so the way that our 3 boat length circle detection works is much like the starting pin or the boat end of the start line. You'll mount one of our devices, probably an Atlas Edge, on a mark that you want this to be applicable at, and you'll configure when you set up your RaceSense event that, hey, this device is going to be this mark at this time. And then as you enter the circle, you're going to see the LED bar on your Atlas light up pink. It's pretty clear, hard to miss. And so, we're not at the point where we're trying to call overlaps or adjudicate rules. And even the America's Cup and whatnot is not doing automatic adjudication, right? There's still judges sitting behind that. But we are able to at least tell sailors when they're in the circle. And what we found in the limited testing that we've done is that sailors massively overestimate the size of the 3 boat length circle. It is way smaller than people think. And we've already seen this to clarify to sailors like, hey, when are you actually in the circle? And, we had one instance where a VX sailor mentioned to us, I had this guy yelling and screaming at me that we were in the circle. And I said, look at your compass. It's not lit up yet. And it wasn't. And they didn't enter the circle for another couple seconds and things had changed by then. As a company, it's important to us that we look at the painful points of sailing that do not enhance the racing experience, right? And it's things like having general recalls or having boats not get called on starts when they were covered up, right? Like that's a bad experience. It's the same thing with the 3-boat length circle. Nobody has fun arguing about whether you're in the circle or not, right? It's better that we can all just agree and then apply the rules. So it's another one of those pain points on the race course that we've said, hey, we don't want to change the character of the game. We still want the best sailors to go out there and win and be able to use things to their advantage. But so many protests and so many disagreements stem from just completely human and completely benign disagreements about where the circle is. Because let's be real, we're guessing. It's a really hard thing to guess at. So yeah, that's a really cool new feature. And we'll have more features coming out in the future. Boundary racing for classes that want to do that sort of stuff. Support for different scoring methods, more and more boats being able to be in a fleet with RaceSense. Realistically, the next big feature for RaceSense is something that we have not even determined or likely heard of yet. It'll be an idea that comes from a sailor in a boat park. We attend as a company hundreds of events a year. And so we're really active about listening to the sailing community and what they need. And so, we may know what we're building a month from now, but a year from now, it's likely that our entire outlook will have shifted because of something that we've learned at an event.
And so far, all of these innovations are accessible through a firmware upgrade.
Yeah, so they're all accessible so far via firmware upgrade that can just go onto your Atlas. It's super simple. It's a minute-long process. One of the cool new hardware upgrades that we're offering in the near future is our Atlas Halo RTK. So for anyone who's familiar, RTK is a super accurate form of positioning. It basically takes that SEP that I talked about earlier, being under 25 centimeters for traditional RaceSense, down to about 2 centimeters. And this is the type of technology that the America's Cup uses, NASCAR, all sorts of, major, I guess, survey grade as well as the way that you would put it, right? When you see surveyors setting up their base stations. And this isn't something that's going to be necessary for every fleet, but some fleets may want it. Olympic classes are a really good example. And so that will be, a new piece of hardware with a new GNSS receiver, but we're pretty excited to have that out on the water soon. And it'll bring levels of accuracy to the sport that, are really pretty impressive. So that will definitely be a huge innovation coming forward.
Presumably, any class can use this, and presumably any club racing can use it too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people miss that a lot of the time with RaceSense, and they think that this is some technology that's only available to the upper echelon of the sport. It's affordable and it's easy to use, and we are seeing now, summer of 2025, the vast majority of our usage comes from club racing. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and so my yacht club is Mendota Yacht Club, and we've got a volunteer race committee, a couple guys that go out week after week who coming in were honest with me and said, hey, we wouldn't call ourselves tech savvy, and they're one of probably 25 clubs around the world that run their weeknight racing using RaceSense, which is pretty amazing. So in classes from the Melgus 15, and I talked even smaller, the Optis, 420s, 470s, all that sort of stuff, through the full range of club race boats and classes and fleets and events. I want to make it clear that this is something that is really for all of sailing. And when we started to create RaceSense, it was important to us that this was a technology that scaled to all of sailing. It has to benefit the sport, right? If we're not benefiting the sport, there's no point to what we're doing.
Now we're going to hear from a couple of top sailors who've been putting RaceSense through its paces on the racecourse. So here's Morgan Trubovich and Steve Hunt on how RaceSense helps them sail faster. So I'm now joined by top pro sailors Steve Hunt and Morgan Trubovich, who have had extensive experience racing with Vakaros RaceSense. So, hey guys, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Pete.
Truby, let's start with where you've used RaceSense and what were your first impressions?
For me, it was actually the Maelstrom 32, the M32 class. Started experimenting with it. Of course, all of us didn't really understand what it was to begin with. Now, years later, we're seeing the benefits, but that's where it started for me, was the M32 class. And then it started to pop up into other small boat classes. It certainly didn't go into the big boats until more recently, but now it's very much live and die by the RaceSense system. So that was my first experience.
What about you, Steve?
It was in the J70 a couple years ago, started to use it. And then now it's been easing its way into the Etchells fleet. And recently I've been using it on the TP52 as well.
So let's get into it then. What's different about a RaceSense start?
I think a lot more time is being saved. So when you think of Vakaros, it's an instrument that you can use without RaceSense, which is a network that's being run from the race committee boat. So it's just a tool that you can go out and you can ping the ends. It tells you your distance to the line, how much time's left, and a bunch of other things. Or the race committee may have RaceSense running, and they control the box. And if that's the case, you don't have to ping. There's Vakaros on each end of the line, and it's constantly feeding you real-time information of where the starting line is. And they also control the timer. So you don't even need to listen to the VHF to have a countdown and get your watch right. It just will pop up and say race start 12 minutes or 20 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever it may be. And so RaceSense, you're on their network and it's controlling it. So it's just a device that's basically telling you how far off the line you are and how much time is left. And then in addition, it also gives you more functionality while sailing upwind, like heel angle and fore and aft trim and boat speed and heading. So if you're on a boat like a Melgus 15 that has no instruments, it's a massive step up. If you're on a TP52, it's just another instrument giving you similar information, but it's pretty sweet. And it saves a lot of time. There's no more general recalls. You're not sitting around frustrated that you had a decent start and got called back or vice versa. You're not having black flags, which is pretty sweet. I think that's the biggest thing for me is it gives you time and distance to where the line is. It's not a mystery. And then the day is more efficient with more racing. And you're less likely to be penalized at the start because it just says you're over, you go back and restart, and off you go.
I love the not needing to ping the lines when RaceSense is up, because for me, that's just such a risk area of having collision. If you're in a big fleet and everybody's trying to circle around that pin end to try and get a good ping from it, that just seems a lot of risk, a lot of stress. It's also just waste time.
For sure.
That's a big one just by itself. Yep.
Have you noticed that the midline sag goes away on a start where you've got RaceSense working? Just curious.
Yes, we have. That's one of the biggest changes in the way that you might approach a start that has the RaceSense system operating. The midline sag seems to have disappeared. There used to be little pockets of boats. Some of them were early and you had to match the people around you because you didn't really know where the line was. So you sort of went with the people around you. Likewise, if you were with the lazy group and you pulled the trigger a bit late, maybe there was a clump of boats that were late. That's all gone. Everyone seems to be not wanting to be late. They're at the line early. And then it's this, I call it the video game, which is where everyone's staring at the screen if you're doing it the right way. And then it's all about how you do that last little acceleration and launch, let's call it. Whereas the old days, it might have been just beating the little clump around you. Now it's everyone is together on the line and close to the line. So being able to do your kinetics and accurate sail trim and the right angle of the boat, all those things are going to separate the good guys from the bad now, because that's all you've got left. People aren't going to be 10 boat lengths late like they were in the old days.
Can you talk more about that, about how RaceSense has changed your approach to line, the whole way you set up to the line?
Then I'll hand over to Steve, who's he's got a supercomputer for brains. I want to hear the answer so I can pass it on to the people that are racing against, race against them. When we sailed together in Europe last year, when it was newly adopted into the J70, we both had the same conversation. We know that a year from now, there is going to be some little tricks that we've picked up on. And that's what happens with any new technology or any new technique on a boat. So we both had this curiosity about how do we accelerate the path forward. But certainly one of them in my world, which is more crewing on a boat than making the calls, is how proficient you and your team are at accelerating from a close distance to the line, whether you're rotating the boat a little more than the other guy, whether, accurate sail trim, correct rudder usage, kinetics, the Chardonnay, Steve might call it, but whatever you want to call it, rocking the boat, all those things are now a critical element because, like I said, you're not going to win the start simply because you were the first boat of the 10 boats that were close to the line. Everyone's there now. So the thing that might make you emerge from the fog right after the start is how you launch and accelerate. So that's to me an area that we're now exploiting. I think another one which Steve will probably be able to elaborate on, and I haven't quite perfected this idea yet, but the old days, You didn't want to have a world champion to leeward of you off the start line. You wanted to have maybe look for a boat that's a little weaker so that you had more chance to come off the line in good shape. Now there is an element of risk. If you start around people that don't manage their race sense start very well and push you over the line, or are super late, or are not paying attention to the screen, or they somehow haven't done it right, you're actually in worse shape than if you had started around other proficient starters. So to me, that's one other thing that might have changed a little bit.
When you talk about the video game, who's looking at that screen? Is it the driver?
Usually on a keelboat with 4 or 5 people or more, the tactician is looking at it. And I've encouraged the skipper to look at it with me in the final 20 seconds as well. Because a big thing you'll notice is to get it right, ideally you would be full speed, close hauled with 2 meters on the device at go. And when you're going fast, the meters are going by very quickly. So 2 meters seems pretty close. And you're often heading up from a reach because you've borne away to accelerate. And sometimes you're too close to the line, so people have put the bow down and you're reaching and waiting to head up to not be over early because it says 2 meters while you're reaching. Other times you're racing for the line feeling late. I think it helps if someone is in charge of watching the closing ratio of meters and seconds, and in the final few seconds, if the skipper gets involved as well, it's beneficial.
How's it changed the way that you've started races?
Everything Truby said, I agree with. It's more difficult in that the whole fleet is closer to the line, but it's made it much more accurate in that compared to an Etchells that had no instruments. I sailed with my buddy Eric Champagne a lot. I would say, Eric, tell me boat lengths to the starting line. And every time the timekeeper gives a time, I would like to hear boat lengths to the line, as if we had a box. And so it would just be Eric guessing boat lengths. And when you get 8 or 10 boat lengths away from the line, it's pretty hard to judge it accurately. Now it's giving you exact meters. So that part has become more precise. And then, like Truby said, instead of looking back and forth at the pin in the committee boat like you used to, or looking for a line sight, which you maybe used to do as well, now it's literally all right there. And since the device itself is calling the line, the person at the end sighting the line doesn't even matter because it's the device telling the race committee who's over. And your device is real time right there. Now, instead of someone saying 130 to the start and then Eric saying 6 boat lengths, it's now 130 to the start, 90 meters, or 130 to go, 90 meters, 120 to go, 90 meters. And then we start heading back, 110 to go, 70 meters. And then as the time winds down, you're watching the meters versus the seconds. And typically there's more meters than seconds because the boats go faster than 1 meter a second. And you might have, say, I like to tack off the mini boats at 90 meters at 60 seconds. So at 1 minute, 90 meters is 1.5 to 1. As you're sailing to the line, you're just watching the meter number come down and get closer and closer to the seconds. And ideally, when it says 0 seconds, you have 2 meters. So I think a tip for the listeners is to really get into the closing speed of meters to seconds on your final approach. And to be good at it, you need to do a few practice starts. Just as in real starting, if the pin's favored or the current's ripping with the wind and it's hard to get to the line, your closing speed is slower. Or if you're in a big lull, or if you're in bad air, you just don't get to the starting line. But with the box there, it's very clear. You start going and the meters aren't coming down and you just realize you're going to be late. And then conversely, if you're in a big puff or the boat is favored or the current's going with you and pushing you over, you get to the line much faster than you think you would. Therefore, you do a few practice starts and you get used to that ratio and then you adjust it some for the actual start.
So it sounds to me that a good calculator to know is how to translate your boat speed from knots, if you're going 3 or 4 knots as you approach a line, into meters per second and sort of get used to that.
Yeah, so you would think that that's right. And I've sailed with a few engineer types that email me a spreadsheet and it tells all these various speeds and how many meters you go per second. And why that doesn't work is that you can't actually do those calculations in real time. And it's not a static environment. Because your speed is your speed forward, but it's not necessarily your speed towards the line. So as the pin becomes favored, you're more paralleling the starting line. And as the boat becomes favored, you're sailing more perpendicular to it. And your speed is changing. You go high and slow. In a J70, you might furl the jib, and now you're going 3 knots. You pull the jib out and rotate down. Now you're going 4, 5, 6. And your speed is rapidly changing, which would be a hard calculation by itself. But in addition to that, current and line bias are also a factor. So I've never really seen anyone that could actually do the math. That's why I think it's better just to do a few practice starts and see how quickly you close on the extra meters. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's as you would think. Sometimes it even changes. On the final approach, I often like to guess where we should tack at a minute or a minute 30, whenever you choose to tack, and then I like to briefly sail close hauled and just check in and see, are we closing on the extra meters? If yes, it's like I think it is, okay, head back up and go slow. But sometimes you tack, and if it's a left shift or a lull or both, or if you're in the second row, sometimes you just don't start closing and you realize, I better keep going here. So it's a practice thing, and it's a real time in the moment thing as well.
It is. And I think the last thing Steve said about that idea of going close hauled and just getting a feel for the rate of reduction in distance, giving you a clue as to whether you might need to just get the boat going a bit faster or whether you've got lots of time to kill. His concept is going close hauled and just having a quick look at how quickly the meters are dropping. And if they're not dropping, you are either sailing towards a very favored end, or you've got a left shift, or there's lots of current, or there's bad air, or there's all these reasons why it might not drop. And if you don't go close hauled and you think it's just another start and you haven't done a practice start, so you don't have a feel for it, next thing you know, you are going to be the only boat that's late to a RaceSense start because you haven't judged it right.
So I sailed with Truby in the J70 European Championship, first time we'd ever sailed together. And he was amazing. He's the best communicator I've ever sailed with. We actually ended up winning the competition, first time we'd ever been together as a team. But I absolutely love sailing with him. He's so great at communicating. So I think an important point for the viewers or listeners would be to have Truby explain, like, how do you communicate what's on the Vakaros, the time and the distance, and maybe any other information it gives while racing?
Yeah, well, thanks for the compliment. There's only one person who communicates better than me in the sport of sailing, and there's that guy. So you got both the talkers. That is a tough one. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but moving it into bigger boats, one of the physical limitations is the size of the screen. So now we're doing the 52 Super Series. The people that want to see the screen, it's basically like an iPhone that's miles away from them. So, we're trying to assign a person who can be audible calling the distance. And we haven't quite figured it out yet, but that is a very difficult thing to do, is to communicate those meters in quick enough time. So I think the solution is always going to be the people who need to know the distance are going to have to be able to see it. And I know I've talked to the guys at the Vakaros, and they are coming up with, there will be a future solution where it can be displayed on someone's iPad on the back of the boat with all these expensive navigators that are on those boats, or a bigger screen. On the smaller boats, I think having the time to the start called should be soon after, followed by distance. And I think that's a good habit to get into. I don't think these two numbers should be independent of each other, because it can be, as we all know, it can be a frenetic situation with all of the sound of flapping sails and boats coming in and trying to get overlaps and the odd yelling at each other and all the stuff that goes on. I think that finding a way to make this almost a standardized communication where, the time gets called and then shortly after the distance, and if possible, separating those two voices so that it's clear. So someone isn't saying, 55 and the other person's saying 58 and you don't know which is which. So we would say, 55 seconds, and then the second voice would say 58 meters. And so I think that's one way we communicate. But I don't think anything beats having the decision maker see the screen themselves. I just think some of these things are too quick. And for sure on the 52, I've been trying to assign it to other people. On the Katana, for example, we have the front grinder, the person closest to the screen, facing it, and in theory should be able to concentrate on it a little bit. But with all the noise and all the stuff going on, and, as Steve says, one thing that can happen when you're turning up to the line is it will say 20 meters and then it will say 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. And it's hard for someone to say that, especially the last turn up to the line. It's not like the old days where you just closed your eyes and turned up and hoped that you got that last right and then the sound signal. You can now see if you've messed it up. But I don't think anything beats having the decision makers see the screen really well. But there are factors there, not to get into too much in the technical side of it, but right away I will tell you that when I'm handed one of these Atlas 2, these Vakaros units, I know that they are supplied with a default brightness of 70% and a and a default sound of 70% and a default LED light of 70%. They have an amazing battery that lasts for 100 hours. There is absolutely no reason not to have full brightness, full sound, and full LEDs. And I would be shocked if more than 20% of the fleet are knowing that that's the first thing they should do, is turn up the brightness, make that screen as visible as possible. Another one is, if you've only got, let's say, time to start on the top of the unit and distance, don't mess around with the default pages that it gets supplied with. It has little numbers for heel and whatever. Get rid of all of that. Make a page that just has the two biggest numbers you possibly can, with the brightest screen, with the loudest audible, and then invert one of those two. But basically, the top number will be black writing on a white screen, and if you don't do anything, they'll both be black writing on a white screen. And if you have 12 meters and 12 seconds, your brain can literally lose itself. So invert the bottom number, the distance number, so that is now white writing on a black background, so that it's always clear. It's almost like the screen is divided, and your human brain doesn't make the mistake. And I've sailed with people who have, at the last minute, we've gone over the line, and they said, "Oh my God, I was looking at the time, thinking it was the meter." So, the only reason I'm bringing that up now is because I don't think anything beats the decision makers being able to see it. Yes, with a minute to go, it's great to hear the time and the distance. But with 10 meters to go, that can't be on someone else. That has to be on the person that's either turning the boat or telling the person to turn the boat. And if you're going to do that, have the brightest possible screen with the best possible chance of seeing it. That's my tip.
I didn't know there was audio. Does it do a countdown for you?
Sound, it's amazing. As a coach, I literally synchronize video streams off of hearing this beep. So the beep starts, it goes quite regularly. It'll start when a race start is scheduled, and it will go beep, 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 and that'll bring your attention to it, and it'll say new start. And then the countdown will happen, which is another amazing feature that I know Steve brought it up earlier, but just a quick one, an anecdote for me. I've spent all of my time in big boats begging every navigator on all these big fancy boats to please put the time to the start on the mast early, maybe 25 minutes before, maybe when we get out there to do our tune-up. And they will say, well, everyone's got a watch. Can't everyone figure it out? We're trying to choose which sail we put up. We're going to, whether I drop the jib and put it in a bag before the start. There's a million things that go on, and all of it is based off of how long we have to the start. And if you have 15 people on a TP52 or 13 people looking to... So I would beg the navigator to do it. Gone. Never begging again. The RaceSense is brilliant. It will say beep, 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 new start, and it might start counting down from 37 and a half minutes to the start, or it might be 21 minutes. That is another huge gain in my world, at least, is that there's no more surprises. And there are people still running around like, how long to the 10-minute gun? I'm like, it's written right there, on the 52. People still aren't used to the fact that is the race committee right there on that little screen.
I love the fact that it's displaying the time for the next race, because it's always me at the back thinking, okay, guys, we've got 25 minutes down to the warning. There's a lot of stress on me where there's no excuses. You say everybody knows what time the next start is.
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing. And if they postpone the race, they abandon the race, all these old days. I've got another anecdote we did. It might have been, I did a J70 regatta where somebody asked, it was a really crappy race, and we all thought it was going to be abandoned. We weren't sure, though. And somebody on the radio, a female voice came through, the same sounding voice as the race committee, and I guess they asked, is it abandoned? And all half of the fleet heard was the voice of what we thought was the race committee saying it's abandoned. People were pulling out. And then, some boats weren't. And we were like, whoa. Whoa, keep racing. And I think I was the one that passed on to my team. I think we're abandoned. But, well, anyway, again, catastrophic mistake in a major regatta, heading back towards the start line. The race wasn't abandoned. That will never happen in a RaceSense race, because the fleet is notified instantaneously. So there's lots of these little areas that we didn't even think were going to be a thing, and there's probably more to discover, but there's a lot of benefits to the system that we're realizing after the fact.
Steve, tell us about how Vakaros helps you find the favored end of the starting line.
Okay, great. This is a huge benefit of the Vakaros. So before it was complicated, this is also a fleet equalizer. And if people aren't using it, they should. Before, you would have to get outside the pin of the boat, usually the pin because you can see through it, line up your forestay, your mast, the pin, the flag of the committee boat, get a bearing, subtract 90 degrees in the northern hemisphere, and that's your square to line number, meaning if the wind is from that direction, the line is square. And this is really important on a really long starting line where they go head to wind before the start to see which way your bow is pointing trick. Doesn't work as well on a long line. And that takes energy and effort to get way over there and do it. And now you start doing head to winds, comparing it to that square to line number after doing a bunch of research. Well, the Vakaros does that for you because it has the 2 points. And you just hit the line button, and it has a line and the starting line, and it shows a square, and it gives you the number. Let's say it's 200 degrees. So you think, okay, if the wind is from 200 degrees, the line is square. If the wind is from 210 to the right of that number, the boat is favored by 10 degrees. If the wind is from 190, it's 10 degrees pin favored. And now it's just there. Boom, you get your pings. Or if RaceSense just does it for you, you don't have to ping anything. Hit the line button, gives you square 2, and then you do a head to win, and you can instantly tell what end of the line is favored and by how much. It's brilliant.
Yeah, again, it's a time saving, it's a stress saving, and it's also that thought about, okay, I know exactly what it is. This isn't a guess. I know with some accuracy where it is. Yeah.
And tactically before a race, you should ask yourself, okay, team, what do we know? We know last race the right paid. We know the current is favored on the right. We also know the boat is favored by 7 degrees, or we know the pin is favored by 15 degrees. So it adds a known quantity to help you figure out a strategy before the start, which is pretty cool. Whereas before, a lot of people didn't know that number.
Has the RaceSense data changed how you run debriefs?
For sure. It gives you a lot of data, and I'll speak to it from the tactician standpoint and then let Truby speak to it because he is actually the one that does it when he's coaching. But you can download a log file, and it gives you your track for the day and other details like your heel angle, your speed, your heading. And if you get a few boats involved, like we just did a J70 Worlds training camp, and everyone sent their log files to a friend of ours in Europe named Ivan that would crunch all the data, send it back, and give you a spreadsheet of this was everyone's speed, this was their VMG, this is the distance they all sailed, shows everyone's track, shows color coding how close you are to top speed. If you're going top speed, it's green. If you get slow, it turns red. So you can look at everyone's tracks around the race course and see who is the most consistent speed at a high level. And as you might guess, the best boats had the best average of a good consistent speed all the time. They weren't fluctuating as much. It gives you a lot of information. You can look at, if you have that data of other people too, you can look at what was the top boat of the day's heel angle average upwind. Oh, it was 12. And then you look at your own, oh, ours was 15. Maybe we need to try to figure out how to sail a little bit flatter. Yeah, it gives you a lot. And Truby can speak to it too because he plugs it into Sail Nord and can show you GoPro footage, drone footage, and all the data from the box, distance to line, time to line, how fast you were off the line with the accompanying video, and it's amazing.
Oh, no, it's definitely, it's much improved the debrief process. And luckily, you know, there's only a limited amount of information coming with that log file, which I love. You know, a TP52, for example, they are logging 100 elements, the load on the leeward cap shroud, and and you can have all these millions of numbers. I actually quite like the Vakaros focuses on the most important things: the speed, the heading, course over ground, for example, your track. All these things come from it, and so it's all you need to be able to bring a team up each night is to be able to see all of these things that Steve had talked about. When you really get into the nitty gritty, you can even choose to chart for a maneuver. Like in the M32 coaching, for example, tacks are very painful in a catamaran, a high-speed catamaran. You go from doing 12 knots upwind to 0 or 2 knots. You almost go backwards if you do a bad tack. We can graph just from using the Vakaros data. For that tack, we look at the speed coming in and then the dip in the speed, and then the build back in the speed. And now we're measuring this, I call it the valley, but a great tack will have a less volume in the valley, whether it's by the speed building very quickly or, so these sorts of things, you can go into a lot of detail. Yeah. But the most important one to me is the reviewing starts, which we all know always has been for the rest of time the most important part of a sailboat race. And more fleets more or less than others, but it's never a bad idea to get a great start and being able to debrief the start with the actual time and the distance and have a look at that, have a look at the ratio. What was the ratio of time to distance when we tacked? I coached 3 Etchels sometime this winter, and one of the teams had a lot of trouble starting, and one of the other teams had a great day starting. So I just compared the tracks. And once you have this screen showing where all the boats were, it was clear the team that had the great starts had like a formula. They were at the same place with 3 minutes to go before the start, and they're at the same place. And then they made their choice from there. The team that had a bad day, it was like completely, it was a Jackson Pollock art form. It was basically, but the tracks were never the same, not even close to each other. So that was an easy fix. Okay, tomorrow, why don't you have a goal of 3 minutes being 100 meters below the committee boat end of the line, or whatever it is you choose. Those sorts of things, I wouldn't have even figured it out until we had the tracks and went, oh, there we go. There's you don't have a form, you don't have a pattern. There's no pattern. So it's chaos. Yeah. So there's a lot you can do with the log file for sure.
I love that thought about that V that you get in velocity as you're going through attack. I mean, have that data over time is really interesting, because that's, with a bigger keelboat, that's absolutely critical there. To try and get a J105 up to speed again after you've just let speed scrub off takes a long time. So super useful.
Another one, just this one always stands out to me as a testament to how valuable these things can be, is that the Equals class for the longest time kept them out of no GPS devices, for the longest time. Now now it's changed. Well, the year that I was coaching Veracity, Steve Hunt won pretty much every regatta, and then it came down to us, at the World Championship. And we were using, I just put one under the boat for some practice days. And it hadn't really crossed my mind that Victor Diaz de Leon was the tactician. And of course, we did one of our debriefs after one of the practice days. And we looked at that, the speed build of the tack. And he said, well, we've never seen, this is actually information that we have never seen on an Equals. I have no idea what a great tack looks like in the data versus dataless forever. So, in that interim stage where the devices, certainly you weren't permitted to use them racing, and now they've let it go, so it's available for everyone. But I hadn't thought about the fact that even just having that thing just so that I could have the time to the start at the very least in my debrief, actually we got some other benefits. He was like, wow, can we try some different tacks tomorrow where we come out low and build speed quickly, but travel more distance, and we'll do some thin tacks and so even before it was being used properly, it was already a useful tool, and now it's even more useful now that it's everywhere.
Right, and the cool thing is, if you're techie and you want to do it yourself, you totally can. But there's also people out there, like an assistant coach and friend of mine, B. Lindsay. She's doing an Olympic campaign, but her profession is data analytics. And programs around the world send her their log files from the day. She processes it either in an hour or two and sends it back, or maybe while they're sleeping, sends it back the next morning. And you can look at all the details, and you can ask her to study that one thing. You could say, tell me how far off the line I was in all the starts today and what my speed was. And could you also tell me which tacks were the best, and circle them on the chart so I know which ones they were and why. And she can send it all back to you for a nominal fee. There's a lot you can glean from this, whether you do it yourself or hire someone to do it.
So if you've also had a GoPro and you've been videoing your practice, presumably then you can match that to the data. God, that's really amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Advanced technology is transforming everything, including sailing, obviously. So how do you, as pro sailors, maintain the balance between using tech tools like Vakaros as data analysis and then relying on your instincts as a sailor? How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the Vakaros and other instruments have evened the playing field. And for example, in the Equals, you have to see the starting line and know how to use a line sight well to get a good start. And sometimes you can start 2 lengths ahead of everyone. That doesn't happen anymore because everyone can see where the line is. So that hurts the sailor that maybe sails every day, doesn't have a desk job, or is more naturally talented. Also, your feel upwind in Equals, before there was no speed. Now with the Vakaros, there's speed. So for example, before I would say, Jim, my skipper Jim, I'd say, I think we're slowing down a little bit. Let's press, bow down, put the bow down and get going. Now with the Vakaros, I feel that and I look and we're a knot slower than we were a second ago. So I realized, wow, like we were slowing down a lot and then fixing it. And now everyone can see it in real time. So the speed changes, and maybe someone that has less of a feel or just started sailing the Equals, they don't understand it as well, less experience, they can more quickly speed up. So it's great, I think, for the back and middle of the pack. It's even the playing field on starts and speed. And Heading, it gives you your average heading if you want it to, so you can kind of figure out if you're lifted or headed. So that's one thing. The second is that I think if you have a really good feel in sailboat racing, no matter what instruments you're using, they lag just a hair because it's feedback to what's already happened. So I still notice, I feel like we're about to slow down. And I look at the speed and it doesn't change. 1,000, 2,000, and then it slows down. So I think you still have to trust your instincts and use your gut feel if you have a good sensibility with that, a good feel for a boat. So at the end of the day, your eyes and your feel are always most important. I think I've heard Terry Hutchinson talk about that. On the 52, you have all these instruments, burn time, lay lines, distance align. We talked about this last time, Pete. And if you just use the instruments, you will fail sometimes because they're wrong. And if you just use your eyes, you might not be as accurate as if you also had information being fed to you from a computer. So I think you have to learn how to balance the two and learn how to use the tools. So it's a learning process, I think, too, to figure out how much to use them. And it's still better to stare at the telltales of your jib than the speed, because if you're dancing the inside telltale of your jib, you're slightly pinching, and if there's breeze, you're fine. But if it's light air, you're about to slow down. Whereas if you just looked at the speed and you happen to head up and not know it, or you get headed without knowing it and the inside telltale lifts in light air, you are about to slow down. And the speedo or the Vakaros is going to tell you a couple seconds after you slow down. But if you're watching the telltales and you see it, you can instantly put the bow down and save it.
So, Steve, you talked about the lower half of the fleet gaining some advantages out of having the Vakaros system. But at the same time, you guys as experts at the top of the fleet are already thinking about the subtleties that you can use. So I guess there'll be some sort of compression in terms of the competitiveness of the fleet, which is not a bad thing. But you guys, top sailors, you're going to figure out how to use this to push your way ahead of everybody else.
I think the gains are asymmetrical, though. I think if you're in the back of the pack and you are wondering if you're slow for 30 seconds and then maybe trying a few things to figure it out and you go slow, 2 knots slow for 30 seconds, changing that is a massive gain. And if you're already in the front of the fleet, it's going to be tiny little gains, maybe keeping your speed just a hair more consistent to the 10th. Whereas if you were the guy in the back and you're 2 knots slow for 30 seconds, you lose 15 boat lengths. Now you can see it and react in 2 seconds. So I think it's more of an equalizer. And then maybe, like you said, the cream of the crop might get a little bit better with it.
So, Chuby, do you have anything to add to that notion of the balance between using these sorts of technical tools and your natural sailing instinct?
Well, remember, I come from a world where the Vakaros is actually a very simple electronic piece of equipment compared with what I've been living in most of my career. 5 America's Cup campaigns where it was just a science project. Everything was very hyper complicated and nuanced, and the electronic systems, even the instrumentation on a 52 in the Super Series is mind-numbingly, lots and lots of work goes into it. And also that has more risk, in my opinion, of doing what Steve mentioned, which is losing track of the fundamentals. I'll give you an example. So this new 52 team, Katana, the owner, driver, came to our first training week together as a team, and I thought to myself at the end of the week, we've got some work to do on our owner. We went away, we came back a few weeks later, we did our first event. We won the first event. And we were riding home together, he and I, and he said, "What do you think of my driving?" And I said, "Well, if I'm being honest, at that training week, I thought to myself, oh, wow, we've got some work to do." And I said, "This week you were so much better." I said, what did you do anything different? He goes, "Well," and I don't mean to insult anyone, but I got on this boat full of these great professional sailors. We had all these instruments. And all you guys talked about was the instruments, the boat speed, the wind angle, the runner load, the rake. And he said, I was drawn into that world and I just started staring at these numbers. And before long, I forgot. To me, in the end, it was so complicated to me that I didn't know what I was doing. He said, I went home and I thought, wait, I learned to sail looking at the telltales and feeling how much the boat was leaning over. Why don't I come back and just start with that and then let those guys tell me which numbers I should look at, if any? And I thought to myself, wow, how many people have we steered wrong? He verbalized it so well and so quickly. And I thought about all the times we just speak about these numbers. I don't think the Vakaros has as much risk because it's a much simpler tool and it doesn't have all of these pieces. But my point is, There is always a risk. These are tools to be used correctly, just the way Steve explained it, and all the examples he gave are perfect. There is nothing quite like looking at the jibs, telltales, and feeling how much the boat is leaning over and just working with that. And if you do that, you're already going to be better than someone that's lost in a tree of instruments. Now, once you get more comfortable, then you start to branch out and start to add a few of these tools. The Vakaros, to me, you can't say it's overcomplicating things by telling you where the start line is, what time the start is going to be, the race is postponed, your OCS, and watching this fleet of J70s hit the line and 17 boats just flapping sails within 2 seconds of the starting signal. And I thought, that's an unusual look, but that's because every one of those boats were told they were over the line. No more general recalls, no more guessing whether your race had been, affected by someone's judgment. That's not overcomplicating. I don't think the Vakaros can go too far down the path of distracting us from the fundamentals. I think it's just got the stuff that we need and not too much other stuff. So I think you can use it pretty safely without getting lost.
So we've been talking about Vakaros RaceSense, but there are going to be a lot of races where the RaceSense capability isn't switched on for various reasons. But the Vakaros is still a really useful instrument to have.
Absolutely. I have a glaring example of that. Again, I'm sailing on some of these expensive programs that have invested multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars into the instrumentation package, but they all run on batteries and they're all sitting in salt water, and there's just always a possibility something doesn't work. On these boats now where we have, even when the RaceSense system is being used after the start of the race, there is always a possibility on any level of boat that you sail on that your instrumentation is going to crash. And I have examples of it. My recommendation to anyone who owns one of these units, and anyone who doesn't should buy one for this reason alone, in my opinion, at any level of sailing, is that I would recommend making a page. I call it my emergency page, and it's the after I've turned up the volume and the screen brightness and the LEDs. Another thing I do is I make a page, and I call it my emergency page. And I have the speed on the top, the heading in the middle, and the heel on the bottom. And the thinking is, if we ever didn't have instruments, this could be, well, it's happened. It's happened now in a J70. It's happened on the GL 52 class, and then finally it happened in Europe in the Super Series 52, which is, a high end of Grand Prix monohull racing. These instruments go down, you have nothing after the start, you go forward and you push the page button, and suddenly you can do the race. And we did a race in the 52 World Championship recently, a few weeks ago, with the speed, the heading, and the heel. And if we hadn't done that, and if we just assumed that unit was just there to help with the starts and all the other reasons we've talked about, and I know a navigator now who trusts it so much. He's experienced it now in the 52. He said, I'm going to take one of these on every offshore race I ever do, because you could be sailing 100-foot, $30 million boat, and the instruments go down, and you're using your phone to try to figure out your heading. He said, it's a 100-hour battery. I'm just going to take one everywhere I go. And that to me is not a bad idea. I would have it even if you weren't ever doing a RaceSense.
I think the beauty of the Vakaros is it's a game changer. If you're practicing, you can look at speed and heel angle, two of the most important parts of sailing well. A real stable boat's the most important thing. So if you're on a boat that doesn't have instruments, you can just go practice with this instrument and get faster and better, more consistent speed, more consistent heel angle. And then actually on race weekends, it's allowed us to race more and have more fun. There's no more black flags, no more round the ends rule. If your OCS, it just tells you, and you dip and restart, and you do have a penalty, but the pain before of sitting out a race in a black flag or sailing and rounding an end was a massive penalty and kind of ruined your weekend. Also, Truby and I have both been to many events where you do tons of general recalls, and it takes forever. They reset the line, you do it again, you just waste so much time. So all of that's out the window. And then the biggest thing, besides having more fun, saving time, practicing better, is that the art of starting is, everyone will tell you, is time and distance. This unit literally gives you time and distance right there in your face, and it helps you get better starts. So it's a game changer, and it makes sailing more fun and better on many levels.
Yeah,